Good evening. No, good afternoon. I hope you're well. And I'm very happy to welcome you to this session on long-term strategies in financing the energy and transition as an official side event of the convention here in Baku. My name is Romeo Bertolini. I'm the Director of Operations of the NDC Partnership Support Unit. I'm based in Bonn. And the NDC Partnership is always very happy to moderate multi-institution events where we connect the dots, where we bring in our members. All the colleagues here on the panel are members, and the colleagues on the panel are actually first and foremost Dr. Asami Miketa from IRENA. Asami. Then we have Mr. Nabil Moura Kadri from Nigeria. Please join us at the front. I did not, right? Mr. Nabil? No. Oh, Miss Amoudi. Amoudi, of course. Sorry for that. But Mr. Kadri is not here? Okay. Sunga is here from... Ah, there she comes. Okay, and Joy is also here. Hello, Joy. So we have Sunga from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and Joy Busulo from the World Bank. And we also have we have a colleague, I think something changed, right, from Brazil? Ms. Dava Choedron? Oh, here you are. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. No, I'm really confused here with my notes. I'm very sorry for that. So this was our colleague from Bhutan, Ms. Dava Choedron, and then we should actually also have our colleague from Brazil. Where wasn't there just a colleague from Brazil just now? He will. Okay, perfect. Okay, a little confusion here. Excuse me for that. I understand that we have after two presentations, we have an agenda which brings these colleagues here together, and we have a panel discussion afterwards. But I think we just start, if I'm not mistaken, with two presentations, quick, inspiring presentations. I understand from the World Bank and from. I'm actually sorry that this is really. No, Bernd starts. I had my notes so nicely prepared. Now they're all mixed up. Bernd, come, please. Bernd Hackmann sits there in the front and doesn't say anything, as we say. Bernd, come and please enlighten us with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Romeo. For a while, I thought I may be in the wrong room.
Yeah, but I sometimes think I'm in the wrong place.
I think it's going. It's all well. No, thank you very much. My name is Bernd Hackmann, and I'm working at the Secretariat and leading there the work on long-term strategies and also the NDCs. And yeah, I would first of all say thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here on the panel and also in the room. And yeah, wish you a very good afternoon. It's for us halfway, probably for all of us here, halfway through. It's been a long, very first week. So yeah, welcome everyone. At this session, and you have noticed probably this is not necessarily the key topic of negotiations. We talk about the long-term strategies and the role of these long-term strategies, but also with regards to financing the long-term planning of the energy transition and yeah, linking this all together. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity to start connecting the dots that we have so far. 75 countries have communicated a long-term low-emission development strategy, and LEDS in how we always refer to it. That's a bit complicated, but it actually tries to bring together what is really important. And that is, on one hand, the long-term planning, the long-term dimension, the low emissions, that is, or the net zero targets, but also, and I don't know if many of you noticed that, the word development is actually not very often in the whole Paris Agreement. So the place where it's most prominent is actually in the long-term low-emission development strategies, because it is one of those documents that really aims at bringing a long-term perspective, emission reduction, and development all together. And I think that makes it extremely useful, extremely powerful tools, very, very country-driven. But as we will see, that also needs a lot of planning and with that financing. As I said, we have 75 parties that have already submitted a long-term strategy, many with carbon neutrality goals. And just to put these 75 in perspective, that's roughly a bit more than 80% of global GDP, of global emissions, and also similarly global GDP. So that means almost 80% of the world's economy is already covered under net zero or zero carbon neutral targets that are out there. So that is fantastic good news. It kind of gives a direction where to go. And you also know that currently we are in the process of governments are in the process of developing their NDCs. So we have these two aspects under the Paris Agreement, what countries put forward here, the NDC and the long-term strategy. And as one of the outcomes from last year's global stocktake is not only that there is a push for the energy transition, but there's also a request to countries to connect and align their NDCs that come out next year or already this year some, and the long-term strategies. And I'm glad also our colleagues from Brazil are here, because the NDC from Brazil actually aligns this already and sees the NDC as a stepping stone towards a longer-term objective. And I think this is really what this is all about, that we have building blocks, not independent documents, but building blocks of a long-term vision or strategy where a country is going. Of course, and I think that is fantastic, these long-term strategies are absolutely country-driven. We see countries coming forward with all different approaches. That makes it sometimes difficult, especially when you're from the financing sector and see each one looks different, but everyone is kind of following the same direction, the same goal. But this is absolutely crucial to really align long-term strategies or climate policies with socioeconomic development and with national circumstances, obviously. Another central element that is critical in all of these long-term strategies is the energy transition. We see it in all of the 75 that we got. It's the cornerstone, the central element of all these transitions. It highlights again that energy is the most important aspect of reducing emissions. But another absolutely critical aspect in all these long-term strategies is how do we finance this? How do we plan for this? How do we plan for the financing and implementation of these strategies? In our session today, we will hear insights from the panel, from the experts on energy planning, on the development of finance, and importantly also on experiences from countries that are going and embarking on this journey. This is a fantastic, a great opportunity, because now we really start seeing how these individual aspects of the Paris Agreement start coming together. Lastly, before kicking us all off and handing back over to you, Romeo, I would like to thank our partners here. That is IRENA. We work very closely with them. We are neighbors in Bonn, so that is already a fantastic opportunity. And also the NDC partnership, who are both critical in really implementing what comes out of this process. And I think it's very important to see that this process, and many of you get a feeling here as well, is not the only thing that will get us where we want to be. It is a part of it. It provides guidance, it provides a framework, but the actual work is done by many, many others. That's done in the countries, that's done by the banks, that's done by colleagues from IRENA, from other organizations that are taking the different individual aspects and really moving them forward into implementation. The NDC partnership is one of those partners bringing everyone together. So I want to thank all of you for doing this here. And over to you, Romeo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, my notes are in order. Thank you so much, Bernd, for that. And I think without further ado, because we have quite a lot to discuss afterwards, I think also the connection to the NDCs probably, I asked Dr. Asami Niketa to give us the scene-setting presentation. Asami, please.
Thank you. I need a clicker.
Initiate.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to address to you here. We have been working on this. Okay, let me just go to this. So I'm going to talk about the lessons learned from a very unique network, which is called LTES network. LTES stands for Global Long-Term Energy Scenarios Network. And I'm going to describe to you what this is. So it is a very unique network of national energy planning institutions. We have currently 30 country members, and Brazil is one of them, very strong a partner. And also we have 15 partner institutions, including the World Bank, the UNFCCC, IEA, they are strategic partners. And what we do is that, so these countries are champions of energy planning. That's how we kind of consider it. Energy planning champions using the long-term scenarios effectively to inform energy policies. And what we do is that to promote the peer-to-peer learning. Particularly, it's not just to discuss energy planning per se, but energy planning in the context of clean energy transition. So many countries have been using scenarios for a long time, but now like countries are facing a challenge of integrating the energy plans into the climate plans, addressing the new challenge of new fuels. So there's lots of new challenges, and this is what we discussed. And through this, we also like try to set the agenda of what is needed in the better effective use of long-term energy scenarios for energy planning. So this network started in 2018. And since we started, the network members has been always very keen to bringing the finance sector into the discussion. The member countries, the energy planning institution has been saying that we really want to understand how financial institutions are using scenarios, how our planning process can be informing the better financial decision. So you can see that we started already in 2019. We engaged central banks at that forum, and then we had also 2021. And then you can see in these years, we had some events, 2019, 21, 23, but we intensified this discussion because of our collaboration with the Brazilian G20 presidency, where they put the energy planning at the heart of the G20 agenda. They proposed so-called Global Coalition for Energy Planning, where they see how we can make the energy planning as an effective tool for bringing the finance and mobilizing the finance. So that's what we do as our contribution to the G20 process. So let me start with just like mapping out different landscapes on how different organizations are using scenarios. So the governments are using scenarios for energy policy making. And energy policy making, of course, is an important part of the climate policy making. Energy scenarios contribute to the development of the NDC and LEDS. And then, of course, this is used as a foundation for the investment strategy. The development banks also use scenarios as a foundation for the investment strategy. Now, very interesting point that we discovered with the engagement of the private banks and the central banks, when we discussed with central banks in 2019, they said that it was very interesting. They said that until a few years ago, climate was not a topic for central bank, but now it is. And the reason why is that they are now recognizing climate as a risk. It is a big step, I think, that financial institutions are recognizing climate as physical risk, but also transition risk. So they are starting to use scenarios for climate risk assessment, and now they are even moving to manage the risks. So the private banks, particularly bigger corporations, they are developing so-called transition scenario to achieve their own net zero goals. So these communities are coming together, and it's also very impressive that how quickly these financial institutions are moving forward with creating new guidelines and new rules. So, and I think these three initiatives that I put there are instrumental, have been instrumental in bringing this new trend. And we also put global LTS network, our network, as equivalent somehow, maybe I hope that we can frame it in this way. And now we have even the Global Coalition for Energy Planning being proposed by the Brazilian presidency, which can bring the topic into even higher political agenda. Now, I would like to turn our attention back to the national planning, the government use of scenario. So when I talk about scenario or scenario, what I mean is that, so long-term focused energy planning, what I mean by this is that there is like actual plan, like energy sector master plan that can be used as a foundation for LEDS and NDC, but also the institutional framework surrounding it. So how this is translated to investment? It's not direct steps, and we have been discussing this topic in this LTS network. We have identified 9 areas of key enablers or best practices based on the actual country example and also through the dialogues between with the financial institutions. You don't have to read it now because I'm going to go through them one by one. The first 3, we call it enabling conditions. So the energy planning can give the very important parameters for setting the regulation and policies. And for example, PPA, green taxonomy, auctions, these are, for example, Brazilian government has been using energy planning framework to translate that into these actual regulation and policies. Streamline permitting, the Chilean government mentioned that they are doing that, the market design, also Colombia, auctions, the El Salvador has been using scenarios and planning to create these actual conditions. And then the second point is the to address the bottlenecks, because having the future scenarios and anticipate what can be the bottleneck is the critical issue. And some of the critical issues include the grid and the enforcement, flexibility, also like to anticipate how much technical skills will be needed, and that's possible only when you have a longer term vision. Also supply chain. So these are also the exact example. For example, the Brazilian government has been addressing the supply chain issue because they have very good long-term planning schemes. The third one is empowerment of the government. What does it mean? So we hear from the governments, particularly in developing countries, that they receive lots of unsolicited project proposals. Now, with the energy plans, they actually have a power to select which ones are actually relevant and aligned with their long-term vision. So we have example with Eswatini because we worked a lot with Eswatini. Now, the another ones, investor-ready plans. So these are the points that came up, particularly with the conversation with the banks. The first point is that current long-term plans are maybe not addressing the short-term investment plan. So short-term investment plan might exist, but there might not be the connection with the long-term plan. So long-term plan should inform the short-term investment plan. Also, it is very important to have financial strategies in the plans. And finally, addressing socioeconomic impacts, that is the key factor, particularly for the multilateral banks. We have example of short-term investment plan, for example, creation of the pipeline of projects that is done in the context of the African Union's Continental Power System Master Plan. Chile has been using scenarios to build the binding strategies, bundling strategies. Again, the Eswatini gives a very good example where they created the business plan out of the long-term investment plan. The next point is the source of finance. Again, the champion here is Brazil. I think we will hear from the Brazilian bank because they work very closely between the planning institution, EEP, and the bank. So they work together and they create the mechanism where the planning addresses the financial institutions' needs. And socioeconomic impacts, the job creation, access, GDP impacts, we have done a quick assessment and we found out that only 11 out of the LTS documents address the job impact. The last 3 points, this is important, the strong planning governance. So many governments may have plans, but it's not just a plan, but it's really relevant. What is really relevant is how this is created and what's the governance structure around it. Key point is communication of policy direction. So this well-communicated plans can give the signal to the investors, the sense of the market volume of technologies and the future growth potential. Because just one time project doesn't give enough attraction, but if you can bundle it for the future projection, future growth potential, that gives more positive signal to the market. And participation to identify risks. So this is participatory process, what we call. So LTS members are very keen to exercise so-called participatory process in designing the plan, because by engaging wider social stakeholders, they are able to identify the potential risks. They can also get the buy-in by inviting them to be a part of the planning process. Finally, it's very critical that these plans are done through the very well coordinated process. Coordinated process among the ministries, among, if we talk about power sectors, among the utilities, not just generation, but the grid developers. So, and also energy and climate. If we have plans that comes from different ministries that are not aligned, this is not very credible. So these are very important component of having a very strong governance. And this is what we, particularly under the LTS network, we develop the good practices lists, and we are disseminating that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think this aspect of bringing the central banks in and the ministries of finance is extremely important. And we've been working as the partnership, we've been trying to make this connection between the environmental ministries and the finance ministries quite a big part and parcel of the work that we do, including deploying experts in both sides. And Joy knows this very well. And with that, I give it to you, Joy, and please tell us about the idea of the World Bank on the LEDS program and the MDBs in general.
Thank you, Romeo. And Dr. Sami has mentioned severally in her presentation MDBs, and linking this very much on the finance perspective. So what I'm going to share is just a very quick high-level overview of a new joint collective initiative of the multilateral and regional development banks to support countries in development and operationalization of their long-term strategies, but also taking into consideration that this very much links with the other climate plans and strategies, the NDCs, the NAPs, and in as much as the focus currently is on the long-term strategies, we also do support the other strategies as well. And just building on the opening remarks, I think we all understand the importance of the long-term strategies. And this is just to reiterate that these are very much country-owned documents that help them to define, the specific long-term climate resilient sectorial transformations. And one thing to remember is that this is a voluntary submission to the UNFCCC, but also important is that it guides the countries in their short-term policy planning. And from our perspective, it also helps to identify investment needs and, ultimately mobilize financing. And it also provides very clear policy signals to the markets when it comes to mobilizing additional private finance as well. In the opening remarks, I think we also noted that currently we have 75 countries that have submitted their long-term strategies. And so there's still a gap when it comes to trying to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also in trying to support the low and lower middle income countries. What you're seeing on the screen is a map that shows the shaded areas are really where they still need to support lower and lower middle income countries. And what you're seeing as circles are areas where the multilateral and regional development banks are present currently. And this just shows that using our in-country presence and the activities that we're already currently supporting, the main objective is to look at how do we eventually enable these countries to be able to develop their long-term strategies, of course, with the ambition to submit, but also with the ambition to inform their national development goals. So our focus is very much going to be around the low and lower middle income countries, but also taking into consideration that we also have the high emitters that we need to be thinking about. So collectively, we are looking to use the new established program that we just kickstarted 2 days ago, the long-term strategies program, to mobilize resources and enable, most importantly, coordinated support. And this is really building on our collective capacity as multilateral development banks and our recent strong record of being able to mobilize up to $123 billion in climate finance. So we want to make sure that we are able to use our collective capacity to support countries to formulate and operationalize their long-term strategies. We also want to look into how do we use this opportunity to strengthen the capacity of the countries in terms of providing technical assistance, policy support. And I think it has been mentioned here how important it is for countries to have the right institutions locally to be able to not just develop, but also ensure that they are operationalized. So capacity building for us is also very important. And in turn, what the long-term strategies help us through this program is they help us continue aligning our financial flows with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So we currently have all our governance and administrative arrangements in place and now ready to kickstart delivery of support. And initially, we are focusing on, starting with at least 5 to 7 countries in the coming financial year as we build it up to additionally 20 countries in the next 2 to 3 years based on the resources that we have. But of course, this is just scratching the surface. There's still so much more need that is required, and we'll keep building this as we go along. What you can see are the logos of all the 10 multilateral development banks that are collectively, participating in this initiative. And so how do we work? So first, primarily is to support the countries in developing their long-term strategies and also, the whole of government, whole of society approach. I think it has already been mentioned very much here that it is important to ensure that it is inclusive and also building the capacity of the countries to be able to make this a very much a country-led process. And our role is to provide the support as the countries sit in the driver's seat and eventually also looking into going beyond just economy-wide transformations, looking into sectoral analysis as well, and also subnational, and also just transition activities, and as well as their NDCs and their national adaptation plans and other climate strategies. Then the second biggest pillar of our work is coordination amongst ourselves, coordination with other institutional partners, the NDC partnership, the 2050 pathways, and many other institutional partners that are already supporting the countries. I think if we collectively and coordinate our activities and reduce the fragmentation and the duplication of efforts, then we'll be able to optimize our resources more efficiently. Knowledge exchange, I think with this particular space is very important. For example, all the work that you're sharing from the energy perspective, and if we continue together through the program in terms of sharing the knowledge, building the capacity within the countries, within the partners, I think that is also very important in ensuring that we are able to build capacity. And lastly, I talked about partnerships already, and we see that this is a very important aspect of scaling the support. So instead of going in and duplicating each other's efforts, is to see how can we leverage the already existing partnerships and work together with others. So eventually what we want to achieve in terms of supporting the countries with their strategies is also ensuring consistency and coherence with the other plans, particularly in this season of NDC 3.0 enhancement. I think there's a huge opportunity to ensure that the long-term strategies are informing or aligning and very coherent with the NDCs and the NAPs as well, and eventually translate into long-term sectoral and systemic transformations within the countries. What is also important for us, I've already mentioned this, is the institutions that will be able to develop and eventually implement and operationalize these strategies, build the technical capacity, and increase the sectoral coordination. I think you all appreciate that developing long-term strategies requires multiple sectors to be involved at a country level. And what this process helps us to is to bring all the stakeholders around the table and ensure that they are part of the dialogue, but also ensure that there is that collective buy-in. And then eventually that buy-in also supports the implementation of the strategies, which improves the planning and also mobilizing financing. Ultimately, of course, that would then increase the flow of climate finance, both from the public and private sector, and better coordination and sharing of best practices. So we're not starting from a vacuum. This is a program that we kickstarted 2 days ago, but since 2019, MDBs have been taking stock of their activities in the different countries. And what you're seeing, the map that you're seeing on the screen is just a breadth of where we are present and the different types of engagements. So currently across all the 10 multilateral development banks, when it comes to country transitions, NDCs, long-term strategies, and just transition, we are present in 151 countries through up to about 1,250 engagements. And this has been increasing since 2019. And this year we are reporting an increase of about 44% on the NDC side. And it comes to long-term strategies, an increase of about 36 engagements. So going forward, I think the focus for us is to really deepen and strengthen our engagement with countries to ensure that we are now leading towards more comprehensive and robust long-term strategies and the other climate plans. My next 2 slides are just to share a bit of flavor in terms of where the multilateral development banks are collectively working together. Of the 1,248 engagements, we have about 250 where we are jointly collaborating, either 2 or 3 different banks working to support a specific country or region. And so these examples are giving you a flavor of where we are currently working together. For example, in Tajikistan, where we have the World Bank, EBRD, and IDB supporting with the development of the NDC climate finance plan. In Jordan, for example, the World Bank was supporting the development of the long-term strategy, while the EBRD also in collaboration worked on the energy sector analysis. Then what you're seeing as the third column is EIB working in I'm not able to say that name of the country, and pardon me, but I'll use this instead. It's Ostrava. And this is the Black Cube project that focused on green job creation. African Development Bank, together with ISDB, Islamic Development Bank, also worked with the government of Benin in developing their stormwater drainage infrastructure. And this is more very much from adaptation perspective as well. And then going next level lower, either in sectorial or subnational level, we had the work that was also again jointly done between the African Development Bank and ISDB in supporting Guinea in their power access improvement project. Then in Turkey, the World Bank in consultation with IFC and worked together with EBRD, where we supported the development of their low carbon pathways for the industrial sector. The last two, the Sustainable Forest Management Project, that was another collaboration between the bank and IDB. And then lastly, in energy efficiency in public lighting in Brazil. And that was a joint project, again, EIB within the Felicity project. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of the MDB LTS program, picking up from, a lot of collective initiatives that have been going on since 2019. And so kickstarting this program is just ensuring that we are scaling up this support, focusing primarily on long-term strategies, but ensuring that we also don't leave behind the other climate strategies. So we want to focus on, first, we see the gap, and this has been said all across the week everywhere, that there is need to increase funding, there is need to strengthen capacity, and most importantly, optimize our resources. And so this is a call to all the different stakeholders, not just our partners, but all of us in the room. Let us look at how we can support the countries and also the in assuring that we are able to strengthen their capacity. And then going forward as MDBs, we also want to ensure that we are more coordinated as we engage at the country level. So thank you very much. And this is just the start. We are ready to go. And we will be looking forward to continuing this engagement and reporting on our work in the long-term strategies collectively as MDBs. Back to you, Romeo.
I remember very well when we started discussing the nexus between NDCs and LEDs, and it was very interesting to see sometimes that, in an environment that was not necessarily coordinated, we had the NDCs and the LEDs not necessarily talking to each other, and they were like excluding each other. I think this program and this work that is so collectively put together, and where we are really happy also to use our facilitation there, is a great example of connecting the dots and alignment. So this is really, really great. Thanks a lot, Joy. Now to our colleagues here in the room, and to the countries that we also invited, is first of all Bhutan and Nigeria. Maybe if both of you could quickly in a minute or so, 2 minutes, tell us from your perspective, what are the most valuable lessons learned so far in preparing and implementing LEDs to promote finance and energy transition? How can these lessons be used to improve funding and strengthen the link between planning and investment? So may I ask maybe you from Nigeria or from Bhutan?
I should start.
Please.
Okay, thank you, my good friend Romeo. I'm very excited to be in this room and also learned a lot from the two presentations that has been presented to us. Basically, Nigeria submitted their LEDs in February this year, and it was a very milestone achievement for us to be part of the global initiative that is championing this process. Basically, we have a lot of lessons that we have learned through the preparation of the LEDs. The very first one that worked for us was alignment. We tried to align the objective of the LEDs with the existing policy document of Nigeria. The very first one was the energy transition plan. We aligned our long term with the energy transition plan. We also aligned the LEDs with also the NDC 2.0 that we have submitted before. And we tried to align the LEDs with the agenda of the present administration. So the alignment is key to us. The very other thing, the second one, is inclusivity. We try to make sure that the LEDs that Nigeria has drafted was very inclusive. So the inclusivity in terms of the elements that was covered in the LEDs and also the sector that needs to be decarbonized in Nigeria. Then the other third thing that worked for us properly was also the issues of institutional collaboration. We didn't do the LEDs drafting in isolation. We did it with in collaboration with all the relevant institutions. What we did was to champion the coordinations and to make sure that the objective of various institutions is reflected as a priority in the long-term emission development strategy. So what we did with the institution is that we made sure that the objective, their agenda for in various institutions is one of this also the priorities of what the LTLEDs will be addressing. So it has a lot of advantages. And one of the advantages is that they are championing the initiative, they are driving the implementation processes, and they own it. Because it came from them as a strategy, ownership was very easy. So they are aligning with the objective that we have put into the LTLEDs is now what they are using to drive their budget. So basically, it is driven by sectors. So this is what we have done in the LTS. And again, what that has brought to us is that it's informing the national budget. So it's not only informing the national budget, it's also championing the initiative of the government in expansion of our national grid, and also putting also words into what we're doing in terms of green infrastructure and also innovation hubs. So this is where our positive results came from. And by that, we're also building the confidence of the private sector and also the public sector investment. We also found a tool to de-risk those investments from those sectors. So this is what we have done in the LTLEDs. So over to you, Rami.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Now, can you enlighten us from the perspective of a small and mountainous but very famous country?
Thank you so much. So I draw an inspiration by my preceding speaker. I think some of the sentiments or the experiences we also share. First of all, I mean, I will thank the floor for giving me this opportunity. So if you talk about Bhutan's LEDs, we submitted or communicated our LEDs last year. So we are already in the first year of reviewing or monitoring per se. So our LEDs encompasses not just the mitigation, it also has the aspects of adaptation, because we believe that adaptation goes hand in hand with mitigation. So in terms of mitigation, we have focused in the energy sector and of course the processes from manufacturing and waste and forest and agriculture and livestock. From that perspective, we try to align it with the international standards. So one of the key thing about our development agenda or the long-term strategy is that we have already pledged and we continue to enhance or renew our pledge to remain carbon neutral for all times. So that is already communicated in our NDC 1.0 and 2.0. And perhaps in NDC 3.0 as well, we will be emphasizing on that. And in terms of the nitty-gritty of the challenges that we faced in LEDs, if I may point out a few that may be useful to some other countries who are, present here or who may be listening to us. The whole the exercise or the task was quite complex to begin with, because it was like what Nigeria said. We try to keep it sector driven, but having it sector driven, it's a whole different task to coordinate and have all the stakeholders incorporated, stakeholders' views and development imperatives incorporated as one strategy in the LEDs. And other thing that we starkly noticed was that the monitoring and evaluation aspects of the LEDs that we did not think through in the beginning of envisaging this initiative. So we feel that it's highly important to incorporate that in the beginning itself. And for example, the implementation plan as well. So while it was sector driven and the implementations are taken up by the line agencies or the project components, I think it's highly important to have a top-down approach in terms of a broad implementation plan as well at a national level. So those are some of the, I think, takeaways that we got. And the other thing is the financing aspect, I think, which is highly, crucial, but unfortunately missing. I think, while envisaging financing needs and critically identifying that we have the critical need of sourcing financing, we, I think, did not incorporate the innovative financing mechanism or the innovating financing aspects of leveraging like something such as carbon market and the climate financing aspects of of the activities or the projects. And we saw some examples just ahead of us in the presentation. We saw some very good examples and countries who are championing by having investment-ready plans. I think that is also very important. While we develop broad strategy at a national level, it's very, very important to have ready to go or implementable projects and activities in hand. Now, in terms of energy transition, Bhutan, as we know, is carbon neutral, and we are carbon neutral due to two reasons. I think one is the sequestration from our forest cover. So we have the constitutional mandate to keep our land under forest cover, 60% of it under forest cover for all times. Now that is a mandate, and we already achieved around 70% of 70% coverage right now as we speak. And from the other side, we have the mitigation aspect. Like, for example, we have electricity generation from hydropower, which is run-of-the-river scheme of hydropower, which is purely clean and renewable. So we see these two really enhancing our capability or the capacity to remain carbon neutral. In fact, we are carbon negative. So from the perspective of energy transition, we see from two aspects. So one is enhancing our renewable energy development, deployment, and energy diversification. For example, we are diversifying by adding the mix of solar, wind, and green hydrogen into the already existing hydropower and enhancing those. So, and from the other aspect, we are looking at decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors, including transport and manufacturing sector. So that is how we envisage to lead to energy transition. And one point that I would like to emphasize on is that Bhutan has nothing but renewable energy to offer. So we have a huge potential, not just as an energy transition on our own. So I think the negotiation tracks, many of which I'm trying to follow, especially the mitigation and just transition, there's a lot of discussion in terms of energy transition. And when you talk about energy transition, I think a lot of discussion on whether it should be nationally driven and nationally confined, or whether it should be an international cooperation. So for a country like Bhutan, I think we share the perspective that it should be an international cooperation, and every country's contribution should lead to the global, reaching the goal, achieving the global target. So from Bhutan, we have immense potential of renewable energy, which can lead or which can contribute hugely to the global target of limiting or keeping the 1.5 degree within reach. So thank you.
That was very interesting insights, and I think you touched upon it already, and we are coming to the elephant in the room, or the hot topic of the day, basically, also when it comes to the overall financial goal, the private sector and its role, and how to trigger and attract private investment. So my first question in that respect goes to you, Sungha, from the EBRD. What's your experience in how LEDS should be and can be structured to attract private investments? Are there any other examples of effective financing mechanisms which have been implemented to support LEDS in developing countries? Can you share your experience?
Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. From the perspective of those who are here to support financing these long-term strategy and NDCs, long-term strategy is really a consensus building tool in essence. It's about really envisioning what are we transitioning for, not only just for climate, but for development. And actually to responding to the opening remark, explaining the LEDS acronym. I think one kind of element that the acronym doesn't highlight is also the need to be resilient, considering the increasing impacts of climate change. And in that sense, it's also very important to think not only how do we decarbonize, but also make the whole system resilient to shocks going forward. So I think in that sense, long-term strategy really helps to think through how each systems are interconnected and how you really have to think how one measure impacts the other, and therefore policy coherence becomes increasingly important. In that sense, even on energy transition, I think we tend to think that it's just about energy generation, but it's actually also about consumption. You know, how much energy do you need for what, and can you actually save it by introducing energy efficiency measures and whatnot? And having that holistic thinking needs to precede before, I think, diving into translation of actions. So in that sense, it's not a necessarily a linear process in the sense that there needs to be a feedback loop constantly in developing these policies. Having said that, I think to translate into investment, the long-term strategy needs to then trickle down at sectoral levels. So how does it reflect into energy sector strategy, industrial strategy, et cetera, where you can leverage on existing policy frameworks of the country, and which is different for different countries, and then that all really sending strong market signal. I think that's kind of a common kind of word that from the from a market perspective we use, that we investors need certainty to take a certain risk, and in order to be more to increase the risk appetite, there needs to be certain level of strong policy and investment signal coming at a government level. To attract private investments, I think private investors need to be around the table. And that means that when it comes to the granular, once there's a kind of general agreement at a economy-wide level, okay, how do we divide up the carbon budget for what time period? Who takes the biggest burden now, and how much is needed for other sectors? Once that is generally agreed, I think it's important then to discuss among those who can finance those investments to be around the table, meaning project developers, financiers, investors, and international development partners, including donors, to think, how do we strategically allocate the money that is needed for initially grant and concessional financing for the early, let's say, technologies to be adopted, versus something that's a lot more mature and it's commercially viable that the private sector can further invest. So I think just having a really inclusive process for the LTS development will be very important. Maybe I will stop there. Maybe actually, you asked for examples. Sorry, I forgot that. We had an event before. We had an LTS program event just now, but the day before, we as MDBs also had an event on country platforms, and it's also something that we mentioned in our joint statement that we released for COP29. Supporting countries in introducing and implementing country-led platforms. And just to give two kind of examples that specifically on energy transition that EBRD has supported Egypt and North Macedonia on is Egypt's Nexus for Water, Food, Energy, which we focus on the energy pillar, which commits the country to phasing out 5 gigawatts of fossil fuel asset and then introducing 10 gigawatts of renewables, including also supporting on just transition. And there's a huge private sector mobilization element, and we have had great progress. I think 2 gigawatts has been financed by private sector to date, and decommissioning is happening. And similar progress is happening. North Macedonia was announced last year, so it's but it is also on track in terms of showing progress. So just two concrete examples of how you can also translate into financing mechanisms.
Wonderful examples, I would say, and looking forward to hear from our co-chair or representative here, or rather the representative of the Development Bank of Brazil, Nabil. How can you, on the national level, with your energy planning, help to attract private investment? What's your experience there? Have you concrete examples of financial instruments, maybe tools and strategies that you have already applied or you're planning to apply, which are in the best interest of the countries? Blended finance, public-private partnership, green bonds, debt for nature swap, and etc. What can you tell us there?
First of all, thanks again for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here as a National Development Bank, trying to share a bit the examples and study case of Brazil renewable energy sector. I must say that to begin my speech, I don't know if everybody here in the room already know, but all the generation of Brazil, when we take the generation of electricity in Brazil, 93% comes from renewable energy. And when we saw the average of the countries of OECD, this number, it's similar to 32%. So our challenges on diversifying this sector are bigger than the challenge to get bigger proportion of the renewable energy in the economy. But to this result is something related to a big strategy that is implemented by the country for more than 6 decades. It's a really long-term planning. And the BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, had a very interesting role in this implementation. First, in the sense that when we are talking on energy, we are not talking only about climate. We are talking about climate, we are talking about sovereignty, and we are talking about social inclusion because of the price of this energy for all the citizens and for the enterprises. So when we have this a view of a development bank, a long-term view, we try to organize these 3 axes to find the best solutions. But Brazil had a very interesting governance of the sector, and this is very important. First of all, we need to have a very strong governance of the our energy sector. We had for example, the Ministry of Energy, of course, but we have an integrated operator of the system. We had a company for long-term planning in Brazil, and this company do a 10-year plan for energy production. And then we have financial instruments as the BNDES to support all this decennial planning. I'll give you one example that is very interesting, the example of wind and solar power in Brazil. For all of you to know, as I said, our matrix is very renewable since the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, but it was almost all hydroelectric by that time. So at the beginning of the 20s, we started a strategy to have a diversification of this renewable energy with more wind and solar. 15 years ago, this both energies were almost zero. And today, they are 23% of all our energy generated. So we came from 0 to 23% in 15 years using a lot of financial instruments. But just to point some of them, first of all, have this decennial planning from the planning company in Brazil to be very transparent and clear on the goals to be achieved. Second one, the auctions to buy this energy by the government. So the government did a lot of auctions to buy this new energy with different prices. And then the use of resources from the long-term investment funds that we have and the National Climate Fund with low interest rates to make these projects economically viable because they need to be economically viable. So that's why we implemented it in partnership with the government. Now we have these results, and I can say that one thing that now we try to develop at the same time as we are generating this energy and this project, how can we support the supply chain inside Brazil, the industry, to make the equipment for all these renewable sectors? Because as a development bank, as a national development bank, again, I said, we try to coordinate this access, the climate, but the sustainable social one. How to generate employees in Brazil, how to generate income, and to strengthen the local production for wind and solar companies in the ground. So to be very very specific in the point, we are using the long-term investment fund in Brazil and the National Climate Fund as this engine for the financial engineering of these projects. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Once again, Brazil at the forefront of innovation and planning. Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think you should share a lot of this experience potentially, but also, of course, it's a very special, I think, position you're in, as you said, in the 93% of renewables. How do you diversify? And I think, looking at the drought you're probably experiencing, you need to really think probably about hydro and how that is all playing together. It sounds like a challenging national lift from afar and without knowing the details how you plan in that one. I'm a bit egoistic here because I'm obviously interested in the nexus to the new and the connection to the new NDCs, and that's why I'm jumping one question and go to the next question so that we can also open the floor for the participants here and the audience for a Q&A session. I would like to start with some brief feedback from Bhutan and Nigeria on the challenges your countries have faced when aligning short-term, mid-term, and long-term emission goals, and how the different stakeholders work with them to overcome these hurdles. What do you do from your kind of, political point of view to make sure that these three things are coming together and talk to each other? How you want to start this time, and then we come to?
Yep, go ahead. Yes, from Bhutan's perspective, or maybe my personal perspective, to have the long-term strategy. For example, Bhutan has gone through a lot of transformation in terms of governance, in terms of, I think we had a reshuffling and transformative exercise where we saw 10 ministries being aligned as 9 ministries. So there's a lot of transformation, and in terms of the priorities also, we have transforming, and now we have defined our North Star is to be to achieve the status of developed Bhutan by the end of the decade. So having a North Star, I think, is very important, and the LEDS also lead to that. Having a very long-term strategy is to have that North Star defined. For example, being carbon neutral for all times. So that one being set, when it comes to short-term and mid-term strategy, we see that when we have the long-term strategy defined, to translate that into short-term and medium-term, first of all, what we see is when it comes to financing, it is not distributed equally. Sometimes the long-term strategies, goals, or the targets are dependent on the short-term targets action and not the outcome, so that you do not see the outcome in the short term or the medium term. Especially it is true in the case of Bhutan, because all our mitigation targets or the projects are very long-term projects. So we have a lot of action in the short term and medium term, but the outcome is only in the long term. And we also believe that, of course, the long-term strategy is what shapes the short term and the medium term. At the same time, the short term and the medium term are subject to the political, I think, will and the decisions which may change. In Bhutan's case, we have a unique scenario where we have never had two governments, repeat after each of the terms. So every 5 years, we have changing governments. While it doesn't really constitute a very major change because of the strong monarchic leadership that we have in Bhutan, however, it does change to some different perspectives and plans in terms of short term and medium term. So that's my short, sharing of views in terms of this.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, yes, thank you very much for the opportunity again. Basically, the very first one that we have witnessed as a constraint when it comes to aligning the short-term with the long-term goal is the stakeholder conflicts. There's multiple stakeholder priorities, and also there's agenda they have set for themselves. When you bring up a long term, it doesn't fit into not only the budget resources available, but also the agenda they do have. So it brings on board a lot of constraints that we find it very difficult to address. And the second one is resources constraints. When it comes to long term, there's a lot of technology needs that need to be on board, and there's no resources for such technology to be advanced at that particular time. So they focus on what they need immediately, not on the long-term issue. So we find a way on how we are looking for a way to bridge the gap between the need, the present need, and also the need for the long term. Then the other one that we have faced is the policy alignments. The policy of the short time may not align with the policy of the long term. So it brings on board the different challenges between what the government wants now to boost economic growth and also what we want to do to reduce emission long term. So these are the three major challenges that we do have. But what we are doing to address these challenges basically is the first one is we're trying to adopt the issues of cross-sectoral dialogue between the stakeholders to put on board the elements that will motivate them to scale up climate action in the issues of the long term and also the short term. So what this means is that we're going to educate capacity building in terms of finding the core benefits, capacity building in terms of presenting what it will pose for the nation positively in terms of sustainable development and also achievement of the present administration. So the next thing we also intend to do is integrated development planning. So we intend to also embed the priorities of the LEDS into the development agenda of the present administration. So the last one is innovation financial mechanism. This is very key for us. We tend to also build capacity in the areas of innovation financial mechanism. Nigeria has been very progressive, and what we have done in the last 2 years was to issue national sovereign green bonds. And this green bond is addressing basically issues of the green growth and also addressing the unconditional targets of the NDC. So what the green bond, the first issuance focused on was only on the issues of energy, energizing education for the institutions, and also promoting mini grids and making them viable for more activities within that sector. So the second issue covered all the sectors of the NDC, which is when we submitted the NDC 2.0, which focused on very 5 vital sectors that also are championing decarbonization. So we are not only focusing on mitigating the adverse impact of climate change by reducing emission with the instrument we took to Paris in COP21, but also while trying to use that NDC to also champion development agenda and also create co-benefits that we address the needs of the common man. So what we intend to do, the constraints we also tend to do, or the solution we're bringing on board is to make sure that the actors are not only states, but also to bring on board the non-state actors to champion initiative, to be like a watchdog, and also bring on innovations on board. And also their prefer technical expertise in sectoral activities, which also championing and also scaling up climate action. So this is what we are trying to do. We are still taking baby steps, and we submitted the LEDS this year, and we haven't really done much in terms of its implementation, but I can assure you it is a very beautiful document, and which Nigeria is going to use to transit justly to where we intend to be in 2060, which was what we communicated in the LEDS. So we have 4 scenarios within the LEDS, and the major one for us is the renewable energy scenario, and also we're using gas as a transition plan for the LEDS. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And should use the microphone. Thanks a lot again. And I think before we go to our discussion, I would like to hear from IRENA, EBRD, from the Brazilian National Development Bank, or from you, Joy, where you see the specific opportunities in the nexus of long-term climate planning, energy transitions, and finance. How do you see a potential for cross-fertilization, and how do you tackle that? Please go ahead, Doc.
Yes, I want to talk a little bit about international collaboration aspect. So we all acknowledge that sometimes international cooperation can be a little bit fragmented. We have seen very good trends that among different sectors, there's emergence of the platform where we exchange best practices, knowledge exchanges. So example is our network, LTS network. This is the network of the energy planning practitioners. And today we have heard of the network with the among the multinational banks. We also know that there's a network of the private financial institutions. We also know that there's a network of the central banks. They're all concerned about the net zero strategies. So there are all these networks and modalities where exchanges are made. Now I think it's opportunity. The opportunity is to again work together across these platforms. So we recently started to discuss with a private corporation, with the G funds. That has been extremely helpful to learn. We learned that the language that we use are quite different, and we are learning from each other. And I think that kind of international collaboration can give a very good opportunity for us to strengthen our planning to mobilize finance.
Thank you so much. Joy.
Yeah, so again, building on the presentation that I made regarding this collective effort that MDBs are coming together to support the countries in developing and operationalizing their long-term strategies. I think where we see the kind of opportunity for more collective mobilization of finance is broadly across. And this is something that I think Sunga had already mentioned in terms of the joint statement that we put out in terms of our target when it comes to mobilizing finance. And I think we've put out our target out there collectively as MDBs on what we would like to mobilize by 2030. And this is an opportunity that we see a big role for the multilateral development banks and regional development banks when it comes to mobilizing finance, particularly for energy transition. I'll let Sunga speak more specifically on the energy side and just leave it here for the side of mobilizing finance collectively as MDBs. Yeah.
Thank you. Nabil, you want to go next? Yeah.
Yep. First of all, it's interesting to notice that I said we are 93% of renewable. And sometimes people say, okay, but where are the opportunities on it, as you are almost 100%? But the thing is that Brazil has two big challenges. One is to grow the economy in the next years and reduce the inequalities in a very fast way. To do both of these objectives, we will need a lot of energy, and how to expand this energy in a sustainable way. So this is the big opportunity in the future. And what we are looking at when we talk about financing this opportunity in the expansion of the renewables in Brazil, we did a very interesting thing. And as Nigeria said, we were working as a country a lot on trying to issue sovereign bonds in a green market. But what we did last year, as I said, we have a national climate fund. This fund was created in 2009 during Copenhagen COP, and it's linked to our national policy on climate. But when the government issued the sovereign bond, a green bond last year, the decision was to take all these resources and internalize in the National Climate Fund. So we changed our view from project to a program view. So in my point of view, we had a very interesting ground into the next years to move faster from projects to programs to make finance on this segment and try to learn something from the forest sector. And I can say one interesting thing. In the forest sector, the world created a very interesting mechanism based in results. the RED Plus. Everybody knows here, if you reduce emissions, reducing deforestation, you can access some resources. So why don't we learn from this experience on forest into the energy transition, as the gap is so huge? When I said the OECD generation is 32% from renewable, the gap from the OECD countries to Brazil are 60%. So how to pay for these results on achieving the goal to be near the 100%? So I think we need to be more innovative in the sense to get faster. So I think we can contribute on this discussion globally as we have these practical examples in our country.
Last not least, Sunga.
Yes, I mean, what's already been said, it resonates a lot. I think policy coherence, as mentioned before, is quite important to ensure that, the energy transition is in line with the long-term climate planning. For example, as I mentioned earlier, in the Egypt Nuafe Nexus for Water, Food, Energy case, there was an upfront commitment by the government to increase their NDC target for the renewables, reducing 42% of renewables coming on board by 2030. So I think that it's really important to build confidence that NDCs can be achieved by being in line with a long-term strategy, but also measuring progress and communicate them widely, and then bringing all the players on the same around the same table to share that vision and understand more concretely who can play what kind of a role, both public and private sector. And we noticed that by supporting countries, for example, in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and many others, where we've developed helped develop low carbon pathways for the energy sector, the conversations are getting much more granular. It's not just about what's the new renewable target. We're talking about grid expansion or improvement, the general full renewable auctions, how do we scale that up? Yeah, it needs to get more granular, and we have to get down to the solutions and tie that up with concrete milestones that could be, again, measurable. So I think building that confidence over time will then naturally lead us to then raise ambitions.
Thanks a lot. And I think we have another close to 10 minutes to go to the floor. And I think we heard a lot about programmatic approaches, country platforms, the stuff that we see, that we hear, and we have truly champions here, I think, on board on kinds of ways of connecting the dots and working together. Any questions on that, on the LEDS, on the NDCs, on the methodology? Please, and please introduce yourself. And
hello, my name is Tomo Ishikawa. I'm from Japanese bank, MUFG. I think the idea of this investment-ready plan or long-term plan, that's a great idea to mobilize private finance. I think many of us from private institutions, we have what I would call home bias, or where we operate, we know the market, so we can finance. But for those markets that we don't have operation, we kind of have perceived risk. We think the risk is higher. Whether it's a reflection of true risk or perceived risk, we can certainly have that debate. But what would be maybe the reason of home market bias is laziness, that we're just lazy. We don't know about, for example, Bhutan or Nigeria because we're not there. But what would be your message to those private institutions with home market bias? How can we be more excited with the opportunity where we don't have operations, but knowing that private finance mobilization is important? What do you think would be the bridge between what you're doing and what we're doing? Thank you very much.
I'll let you guys think a little bit and take a second question, and then we can probably answer it together if you don't mind. Yes, please. we do a second round afterwards.
Yeah. Hello, Jan Siegmeier from the German Advisory Council on Global Change. I have one question regarding the sequencing of public investments and private investment. How important is that sequence, that sometimes public investment has to come first, for example, in infrastructure and public regulation as well, and then private investment has to come in, but on the other hand, you need to justify public investment by private demand that's already there. Does that reflect in the common strategies that you see on the ground? Thank you.
All right. Who wants to go first on the risk question? Maybe we have 2 volunteers to answer, and then we can have another 2 on the sequencing. Please.
Should I start? Yes. Thank you for those questions. First of all, I think to your question, it will be important to look into the policies. I think we are often, as EBRD, looking into some of the markets. We're pleasantly surprised how advanced some of the, for example, ESG regulations are evolving in the more developed countries than developed countries in time. We have institutional investors asking us about, what is the actually transition pathway, starting to really look into these things and trying to understand and questioning, are we looking into the sovereign credit rating properly? Because maybe, as you say, maybe there's a bias going on. So I think the questioning is happening, but I think the first start is to look at how the current policy is evolving and starting from the climate ambition and how concrete has it gotten. I think probably what's more important is when we say robustness, it's not just the target itself, but the details. And to your question as to the sequencing, I think it's very much context specific. Every country is a bit different. Some have bigger private sector roles. Some are very kind of top-down central kind of planning type of a economy composition. And so you have to adapt to the country and the market you're operating. But I think the conversation and the thinking has to happen together. It's not separate, because with the finite public funding resources, you have to get more and more, I think, diligent and responsible for where you channel that money versus where the private sector can really take up more.
Nabil, sure. Nabil.
I would add something on the sequencing of the investments, because it's country by country, but I think it's a matrix or a graphic. In one axis, we have the framework, regulatory framework, and maturity of the institutions. And then if it's more public or private, if you have a ecosystem, financial ecosystem, or a regulatory ecosystem more stable with clear and transparent rules, it's more easy to have the private first and then second the public. But once you have an ecosystem that is not that strong, the regulatory framework are not that strong, we can need the public first to make the first investment and then go the private. So in my point of view, probably we have this kind of equation to understand better which place you need more or less public to begin the investment.
I didn't forget you. And we have one other question. If somebody else has a question, then we
Can I say something?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry.
Okay. I just want to add my voice to what she had said, which she captured everything. I want to address your own question in terms of how to bridge the gap between knowing what we're doing and also showcase you knowing what we're doing, like knowledge gap, right? So the very first thing that we have put on board is that the policy review that she has mentioned is very key. You need to follow up with the policies that has been put on board. And secondly, putting out policies is not the only thing that we do. We also deepen our expertise or resources in doing development of financial strategies, also net zero investment plan when it comes to the LTLED. So those are documents that can champion or can attract investment and can also bring visibility to what we're doing in country. And again, we also finding a lot of appetite in terms of making sure that there is an instrument of de-risking for private investment. So what we try to do is to do national dialogue, not basically for government institutions, but also for non-state actors, bringing the private sector on board and knowing what it is they want to see the government to do differently to promote investment and also to protect their investment. So these are what we're doing in country, and it can also drive visibility and also drive your having international or regional cooperation keying into the investment for what we're doing in the LT long term. Thank you.
Thanks, and apologies. It's very difficult to see the panelists here. Anyone else? Otherwise, you want to quickly come in?
Just to add on the point she mentioned around the long-term strategies and how they provide, these signals, and this is something that was mentioned earlier regarding the extensive modeling and analysis that is involved in putting together a long-term strategy. And I think this is very useful information, particularly for private sector investors who are interested in going to a specific market, because it doesn't just look at the whole of economy, but also goes into very specific sectors with different scenarios, looking into how to reduce their emissions and the different projections. So there's very extensive analytics that is involved in putting together these strategies that could be also another, source of information in understanding the market that you need to go into.
Super, and I mean, with your CCDRs, you lay a good foundation in that. Sir, please, and I think we need a mic. There it comes. And please introduce yourself, please.
Thank you for the session. My name is Punedeep. I'm from Deutsche Bank, and I think my question is partially answered, but I'll still ask. Most of the examples I saw over there were related to renewables, either solar, wind, or hydrogen. Maybe I didn't say hydrogen, but are there any other sectors that you focus as well in terms of financing? And how do you ensure that there's no greenwashing? Because I'm assuming some of the projects will be quite long term in their horizon, right? So are there any kind of something you measure over a period of time to make sure that there's no greenwashing happening? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last question, and then we go to the panel, and we have to close.
Hi, Haruhiko Matsuda. I develop renewable energy projects in Asia. I guess my question is, I would like to put myself in the shoes of countries that are developing these long-term development strategies, I guess. And I think when anybody develops these projects, I think you should be quite excited about it because you're creating the future. But my hunch is a lot of the things are uncontrollable. And there are a few things that are controllable, but there are a lot of things uncontrollable. Even the World Bank, for example, doesn't have infinite amount of money. So let's say you're uncontrollable for Nigeria, could be solved by World Bank, but maybe World Bank has such an uncontrollable area as well. So what are the main parts that are controllable, well, uncontrollable, where maybe parties that are not present here can help resolve? Thank you.
You didn't get that? Okay. Can you rephrase quickly?
My hunch is, given all these discussions, there's so many things that are uncontrollable. Even with all the ideas, all the collaborations of the World Bank, IRENA, and everybody else, I think there's still things that needs to be resolved outside of this arena. What are the big things that may fit into those categories, and who can help them?
Okay, so gaps. I don't know. I understand something in the direction probably of currency issues or other reasons. Joy.
Yeah, I'll start. It was a bit difficult to hear. It's not really refreshing, but maybe the volume of the microphone. What I heard you mention before is the World Bank does not have infinite resources, and that is very, very true. And I think across the whole week, what we've been hearing is that we need to mobilize more and more and more financing to support. And this is something that we recognize as an institution, and having to work together collectively with the other multilateral development banks is particularly want to collectively see how much more we can mobilize, but also how can we deploy better and optimize our resources in a more efficient way as much as possible. We recognize there's a huge gap, and singly as the bank, we may not be able to, fill that gap. And that is why we're coming together collectively with the other multilateral development banks to be able to support this. You mentioned in terms of what other sectors are we present in, and I think the presentation today was very much focused around energy because of the topic. But just in a previous presentation, we talked about many other sectors where we are seeing ourselves as MDBs becoming more involved or engaged. For example, agriculture sector, we are seeing even more in the non-traditional sectors where climate traditionally was not, a main theme. For example, health and social and even digital. So there's a whole multitude of examples of projects where we can talk about in many other sectors that, we're involved in. And we're even seeing more, kind of moving towards the adaptation angle and more focus on the adaptation side of things. So there's a whole lot of examples we can share. We hope that in the coming years, we will have a platform where we can put this to be kind of open to the public, where you can see where we are collaborating, particularly in this space of long-term strategies, NDCs, and just transition, so you can understand the breadth and the extent of the work that MDBs are doing in the other sectors as well.
We're back to back with another event, more or less. Please, maybe.
Okay, let me just add my voice to it too. In terms of constraints for the policy side, what we have identified as policy constraints within the policy side is first and foremost is lack of capacity to develop green infrastructures on this sector. And again, we also lack the capacity to develop bankable projects that will be very viable for attracting green funding. And we also don't have the capacity or the local institutions don't have capacity on green financing. So these are the three very big gaps that we have identified in terms of financing the long-term low emission development strategy. And the last one for me in Nigeria is that we have not been able to do a technology needs assessment, because if you look at our LEDS, we focused on 4 scenarios. The very first one is the current business as usual scenario. The second one is current the policy current scenario. Then we'll talk about the gas scenario. Then the last one, which is the energy and renewable energy scenario that would drive us to net zero by 2060. But there are a lot of identified technology that we've been needing, but we don't have capacity for utilization of such kind of technology. And we also have challenges internally because we want a technology that will be nationally friendly, technology that will not take people from their traditional ways of practices to the global standard. So we want a technology that we address the common needs and reality of our nation, not to be imposed by technology that will not champion climate action. So basically, what we are doing is trying to take global steps, but also doing it in a local and acceptable way for our nation. So there is gap in that sector.
All right. I hope that was answers enough. Take it bilaterally outside. Have a coffee, maybe.
Oh, so please.
No, if we're out of time,
I know it's up for so long. I should have given you the 5.
No. Very briefly, just I think probably obvious, but the political cycles, of course, is a huge uncertainty, and I think a way to mitigate that is really. Therefore, it needs to be an inclusive process, and you have to invest in building the institutional capacity, even if the leadership leaves that memory and that process that's been built needs to stay for it to be sustainable. So that point into your question about other sectors beyond energy, Joy has already mentioned, but EBRD has been very much involved in the industrial sector, decarbonizing the industrial sector, going to like fertilized cement, steel and aluminum, and helping really think through how to decarbonize those sectors, working on agriculture, on NDC implementation roadmap with FAO, for example. So yes, it's all across the sectors, just to be clear. Thanks.
I cannot say no to our co-chair representative, so to speak.
You have
But
the
you need to be
final-
very quick because
Yes.
I messed up the beginning and I'm messing up the end here.
Just a final mention. The thing is that not every neutral technology, when we talk about climate, are neutral when we talk about social and environment. And as Nigeria said, public policy is something related to choice, and we need to choose the technologies that are carbon neutral but positive socially and environmentally. Not every positive climate technology is positive for social and environment. So that is the difficulty on our choices. Thank you so much.